questions and answers or coffee next door? I say coffee next door. But yes, please.
How large was the Jewish community in Tehran when you were growing up?
How large was the Jewish community when I was growing up? Jews arrived in Iran after the fall of the Second Temple. The religion, a religion called Islam, didn't even exist then, and and they had lived there as a result for at least 2,000 years. The community was 100,000 large, and it was a vibrant community. There were schools. The Jews were scattered throughout Iran, and I used the word coexistence. I said that Jews and Muslims coexisted together in Iran. And a friend of mine recently argued with me, who's also Jewish, and said, we didn't coexist. Coexist really implies that we were aware of each other's presence. He argues that he simply lived there, that his family was so comfortable that any boundaries had completely vanished, and he just lived, and coexistence was a word that he no longer liked. So.
Thank you.
Sure. Please.
Just to ask a question, when you had to change what you were wearing, how did you feel about it, and can you tell me how comfortable or uncomfortable it was?
Dress codes are very much like the way we change our clothing here. Summer comes, we take things off. Winter comes, we put things on. And at first, it seemed just like a new season, a new political season. They were asking us to put more layers on. And for the first few months, it was fun. It was something we had never tried. It was a new fashion. We were trying it on. Except that a few months later, when this particular fashion didn't seem to be going out of fashion, and when it seemed to really be there to stay, it then began to feel really oppressive. I remember particularly a summer day. Tehran can get very hot. We experienced the 4 seasons in Tehran, but summers could get quite hot. And I was walking on the streets, and I remember I had the Islamic dress code, which was the scarf, the big raincoat, a pair of jeans, everything. And all of a sudden I started feeling like I wasn't just sweating, I was dripping away. That part of me was just going down with or evaporating with everything else that was leaving me. And I think it was right at that time, especially when I was alone, because I think when I was with a group of peers, I felt it less, because we kind of, we're pulling fun at each other, and that sort of took off the edge. But when I was alone, it was for the first time that I really, really felt that it was awful. Yes, in the back.
In touch with the girls that are the group that you talked about, the Dreamers?
Do I keep in touch with the Dreamers? Most of them live in Los Angeles, so that makes it very easy. And it's interesting because they found out that I was doing this book, and this is a history that in many ways has never been recorded. This is a history in some ways that was meant to be forgotten, that was meant to be erased. It's very amazing how tyrannies and dictatorships get to record what they wish and get to record what they order. And this is part of what they didn't wish to be recorded. So the Dreamers were a generation that were supposed to, whose memory was supposed to have been erased. And when they heard that I was writing this book, a lot of them started sort of thinking of various activities. And I think the hiking group is back in business now in LA. So, please.
Did your whole family come to America, and when, and where did you settle?
Did my whole family come to America? Where and when, and where are they settled? Read the book. Just kidding. I mean, I would like you to read the book, but we didn't come together. We came in bits and pieces. It took us about 10 years to be reunited, and we're all here at last on the East Coast. My brothers, two of my brothers are in New Jersey. One of them is in New York. I'm here in Connecticut. My parents are in Queens. We're scattered, but we're here. But since it took us 10 years to get together, so much of what I discuss in this book, I never told them. It was far too difficult to sit together as a family and say, we missed a decade in our lives. And we were very young when we were separated, so it was really our formative years. And so we never said it to each other. They never talked to me about what they had been through. We never really had the heart to tell them what we had been through. So we, just kissed each other and settled. When I was writing this book, it was, and after I put a manuscript together, it was for the first time that my brothers were actually reading some of what had happened to us as a family in Iran. And my first brother has only recently finished the book. My second brother doesn't stop reading it, and I've had to take it away from him and say, you have to move on to another book. But he doesn't. And my third brother doesn't have the heart to read it yet. But if you ask him, have you read the book, he will say, I am the book. I don't need to read the book. So, sure.
First of all, thank you for an exquisite glimpse that I don't think we would ever have had otherwise. When I think of the news that comes through in current events, and then I think of what you have done, it's really quite a gift.
Thank you.
I did start reading your book, and I was struck by your talking about how for an immigrant, belongings are often lost so that memories become belongings. What has it been like for you to be here after going through what you have gone through in Iran?
Yeah, someone asked me in a very, very important radio interview that I must be thrilled to be here, and I said I wasn't. I was the most reluctant immigrant. I didn't want to leave Iran. I thought that countries are like families. You don't leave them when they're broken. You don't leave them when they fall into difficulty. And so in 1984, when my mother and I left Iran, I had every intention of going back. In fact, I remember we were in Vienna, one of the most beautiful European cities, and I wasn't looking at anything. I was just trying to find the next train schedule or plane schedule to go back to Tehran. It took me many, many years to realize that America was the home of people like me, and that we are a nation of people with memories from far and distant places. And in fact, this is really home to me now. What I have abandoned in the process is the whole notion of this is my country and I feel very patriotic about this particular place. I think, those years to me are in many ways over. We live in a huge global home, all of us together, and we know now that the slightest awful thing that happens 2 countries away is going to come to haunt us here in America. So in some ways, our safeties, our happiness is interrelated. So some of the old ideas that I had about patriotism and nationality have gone away. But there are places that I call home, and those are generally places in which I have people I love who are around me. I think it's our friends who give us a feeling of where is home and where is a strange place.
The speech given by the Islamic principle which I had read previously, but when I heard you reading it, I was struck by the way it, in a certain way, resembles Stephen's experience with the priests in Portrait of the Artist. It has a similar kind of, occupies a similar position, I think. Except that what I noticed was how delicately you treated her. She could have been made much more a figure of fun than you did. I mean, you gave her a certain, perhaps naive dignity, but nonetheless a certain dignity. And, you know, as I was listening to your reading, I was struck by how gently you treated the revolution as a whole. I don't know, I suppose I should turn that into some sort of question, but that was my
How
my
gently
reaction.
you turned the whole thing into a whole? Wonderful question. Well, it's twofold. One is that I wrote this book over the span of 2 years. The first year I was just suffering, and the second year I was writing. And during the first year that I was suffering, and I kind of alluded to it by saying that I wasn't sleeping, and I'm not joking, I really didn't sleep. I read a series of memoirs and autobiographies and coming-of-age stories to see which one of them really moved me or which ones resonated with me. And I reread, as a result, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, a book that I thoroughly adore. And I read the first 40, 50 pages. I don't know how many of you remember it. And I thought to myself, I'm a Jewish girl from Iran. What the hell am I reading James Joyce? You know, this Irish man dealing with Christians, you know, 100 years ago. Why am I reading this? And but I thought, you know, this is James Joyce. You have got to read this. And I kept going forward. And all of a sudden, I came to a portion where the priest was giving the famous hell speech, where he was saying, you know, if you commit a sin, you will go to hell, and this is how the clock in hell works. And he takes on this whole paragraph describing the sound of the clock or the feeling of the passage of time in hell. And I read this and I thought, this sounds awfully familiar. Then I said to myself, well, I've read this before, and then, no, there's more to it. Then I realized I've heard this speech, and it was the speech that this woman gave me. And in some ways, and that of course enabled me to really try to piece this speech together. It also made me realize that fundamentalism is fundamentalism. It doesn't matter where in the world it takes place. It doesn't matter what religion delivers it to you. It brings the same amount of suffering, and people rebel against it with the same amount of ferocity. And so that certainly is in some ways the origin of this particular passage. But you're keen and astute to refer to the idea that I could have been far more merciless treating the revolution or even this principle, and I wasn't. And it was because really these starkly black and white things only happen in Hollywood movies, you know, or in Fox News headlines. I don't know, but pretty much nowhere else. That realities are always nuanced and full of grays and never just entirely black and white. The revolution had many wonderful things. Even with everything that I've lived through now, I wouldn't miss a minute of it. I wouldn't. It was the most important experience of my life, and everybody who lived through it would agree. And you know, I think that's very important, not just in the context of this particular story, but in the context of the Middle East. I think it's very important for us to realize that, you know, thinking of what's going on, or Iran or Iraq or Middle East in general, in the context of good guys and bad guys, doesn't help us understand what's going on whatsoever. That the more we learn about each other and that history and the nuances and the culture and the people, we can even miss the newspapers and know a lot more about what's happening. So. Just nothing.
I also would like to thank you. I have many, many questions about the Muslim way of life. I have friends that are Muslim, students that had lived in my home, business people that had lived in my home. They were learning English and they were continuing their education. And we had many discussions about how women are treated, you know, in the that part of the world. But my confusion and ignorance made it very difficult and made them very impatient with me, because in certain parts people are very educated, the women are very stylishly dressed. Other parts, if they go out, you know, they have to be completely covered. In their home, they run their homes, but you know, in the home they cannot, you know, so and so on. So it's so confusing. I've had many arguments with this one particular fellow I've known for now 9 years, and it's as difficult for him as it is for me. And I think a lot of Americans do not understand what we see on TV is really changing and giving us the wrong impression.
Mm.
We're hearing a lot of stuff that is tragic, but it just doesn't help to I just, you know, like I
Right.
say, and I'm considering going and visiting his family.
Mhm.
But
Where
he
do
tells
they
me-
live?
He's in Saudi Arabia,
Mhm.
but it's interesting that he's originally Palestinian.
Right.
I mean, he's actually Palestinian. His family immigrated to Saudi, and there's a lot of difficulty with that.
Right.
And he does appreciate, you know, our freedom here.
Right.
But of course, he does not appreciate, you know, the other things that are going
Right.
on.
Right.
So we have many discussions, but it's very frustrating.
Right.
And I think that Americans need to know more. Unfortunately, what we are, as I say, getting to know is just making it more confusing.
Right.
So-
What we see, thank you very much for that. I think what we see in television or read in the newspapers is a fraction of the reality. And, you know, it's the story of, you know, people walked into a room that was pitch dark and everybody touched the piece of something and everyone described it as a different thing, except that, you know, when the lights were on, it was an elephant and no one really agreed on it when they were coming across it in the dark. And the Middle East is sort of the best example of that parable that we're living today. It's it is a gigantic presence that each one of us, through the information that we're getting, are touching or feeling or seeing only a very small piece of it. I think, however, if there is any hope to leave you with after this reading tonight, is that I think Iran, in the Iran of the past 50 years, and certainly especially the last 25 years, everything that you want to know, any one of us wants to know about why they hate us there, why Islamic fundamentalism, political Islam, has risen to power. What are the policies that the United States has conducted in that region, which has given rise to some of the things that we're experiencing today, and whether or not there is hope for it? All of these things are instantly answered if we just understand what's going on in Iran. The good news is that Iran gave this whole idea of a Islamic, political Islam and Islamic theocracy a shot. 25 years later, 70% of the nation is under the age of 30. Unemployment is going through the roof, and no one is happy. And the one single demand that the whole nation has is the separation of state from the affairs of religion. That, to me, is the first step toward a democracy. So, as bad as things are, I encourage everyone to take an interest in Iran, because I think it would reveal to you not only the roots of this, but also the reasons to have hope. Thank you very much.
Journey from the Land of No is published by Crown, an imprint of Random House. Visit randomhouse.com for more information.